Let's talk about consumers and what they are, in the sense that consumers don't actually make their own energy. So, how did they get their energy? Well, obviously, they get their energy from feeding off of other organisms, such as animals or plants. Consumers are also known as heterotrophs. There's a more scientific name that's associated with it. Heterotroph. So, like I just said, heterotrophs are organisms that feed off of other organisms, and humans would fall under that category because we either eat plants or we eat animals. Now, let's talk about the different classes of consumers. We have primary consumers, secondary consumers, and lastly, we have tertiary consumers. So, what do these mean and why is each classification different? Our primary consumers feed off of our autotrophs, and our autotrophs are our plants. So, primary consumers feed on plants, and that's really important to know. And these primary consumers, most of the time, are considered herbivores, since they get all their energy from these plants. And herbivores means that they are vegetarian, meaning that they only eat vegetation or plants. And next we have the secondary consumers, which feed off of both plants or animals. But this means that a secondary consumer is someone that feeds off of a primary consumer, but they can also be a primary consumer in the sense that it depends on their food chain and food web as to who they prey on, which we'll get to in the next video. But secondary consumers feed off of the primary consumers. So these feed off of animals, maybe. And most of the time, if they feed off of the primary consumer, they're considered carnivores. Carnivores are anything that eat only animals. Lastly, we have the tertiary consumers, which feed on animals as well. So these are the highest chain of order in a food chain, which I will get into in the next video. But these tertiary consumers feed off of the secondary consumers. So in that sense, there'd also be carnivores. Like I said, most of the time, this is not always a pattern, and there are multiple paths that animals can take in the sense that they don't always eat the same organism or the same food. So a tertiary consumer can also become a primary consumer if they also feed on plants and animals, or they can also become secondary consumers if they feed on the primary consumer as well. But that's the tertiary consumer is known to feed on the secondary consumer when looked at one food chain in the food web. And lastly, I want to introduce you all to this vocab term, omnivores. Omnivores are organisms that feed on both plants and animals. So they eat both autotrophs and they also eat heterotrophs.